Hey guys, welcome back. So, due to much requesting, we gotta talk Doomsday Clock. And this is a conversation that is long overdue. I know, but with everything that's happening in DC Rebirth right now, and the events of Doomsday Clock still unfolding, I wanted to take some time to pick apart this event and start a playlist that really zooms in on the gears of the inner workings of what's going on. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so where to begin? Well, I guess I'd say for the most part that the most substantial events leading up to Doomsday Clock, and not just events, but events and series, would have to be your Watchmen, of course, The Button, The Oz Effect, and Superman Reborn. And all of these things, amongst others, are the events that come together and build up into the Doomsday Clock series, which on the surface introduces the Watchmen into the DC universe, but with the way that things have been unfolding, it appears that there's so much more. And one of the things that I want to do throughout these videos on the span of this playlist is dig into some of these topics that have been resonating in the background for some time now throughout a number of different events, and doing so to really stir up the conversation, or a number of conversations, of mainly what is the true end game of Dr. Manhattan. And so to start this off, because I've really been thinking about this, because part of my reason for holding off was mainly to let more of the issues unfold so that we can tie more of these things together. But to get started, of course, we gotta lay a little groundwork, and to do so, I want to start off with the Watchmen, because I want to attempt to make this as simple as possible. And so with doing that and starting with the Watchmen, who are heroes who exist in a world very similar to ours, in a narrative that Alan Moore designed to be like, what would our world be like with superheroes, and a majority of which without powers, just to keep it very grounded. But amongst them you have Rorschach, who's like your detective, very similar to Batman, just less money and breaks more bones. Then you have the comedian, who's probably the most controversial because his views on the worst aspects of life and life itself as a joke, which is why he deems himself the comedian, because he's taken it upon himself to deliver that punchline, no matter how sick it may be. And yes, he's still a hero somehow. Dude is complicated. But next you have Ozymandias, smartest man in the world, very athletic, super quick, and not like a speedster quick, but he's quick. Then you have Night Owl and Silk Spectre, 100% human, crime fighters, and both of which are like your inherent second versions of their predecessors before the Watchmen started in the late 70s. And then last but not least, you have Dr. Manhattan, who during an experiment for the American government built an intrinsic field subtractor to where he got trapped inside to later reassemble himself, becoming the crazy powerful Dr. Manhattan, which of course took him a matter of months to figure out how to do. But ever since, he's potentially been becoming more powerful, and not so much to the point of gaining new abilities, which initially included teleportation, matter manipulation, telekinesis, amongst many others, but his expansion in power more so relates to his understanding of who and what he is, which really takes us back to like your before Watchmen series, when we were given a much more in-depth look at the different members of the Watchmen, and we were given a look at much of the events that had taken place in their lives long before they became heroes. And for Dr. Manhattan, who was previously known as John Osterman, before becoming a scientist he was a watchmaker, which was a trade that he learned from his father, but much of his past gives us a significant amount of insight on who he is, how he became, and what exactly it is that he plans to do. Because it's here in his younger years that we find out that much of the ideals and mechanics of building watches, they had played a critical part to when he had got much older and was stuck in the intrinsic field subtractor, which separated him on a subatomic level, to where he then had to reassemble himself, but all the while learning through that process how to hone his powers, build a body, and go from there. But in doing so and reconstructing himself, I believe that it not only pointed back to his childhood, like the Blue Man, and putting himself in that same type of image when he pretty much chose what to look like when constructing himself, but I also believe that this concept or idea really deals into heavily to what he's doing in the background throughout the course of the Doomsday Clock event. And it's like he's taken the same concept of which he used to reconstruct himself, which was much like building a clock, because he pretty much had to find the right pieces and reassemble them to reform himself, which was much like repairing a clock. And for Dr. Manhattan, coming to the point to where he exists outside of time, and him being able to see multiple circumstances in one setting, he has then taken it upon himself to fix everything and make it operate in a manner according to what he sees to be right. And to do so, much like repairing watches, much like reassembling himself, he's began this lengthy repair process, if you will, and doing so with taking pieces, components, or even people from other realities in order to do so. And the crazy thing is, like, at this point, we really don't know what exactly Dr. Manhattan considers fixed to be, and at times, I nearly reached the point of getting a headache just trying to see things from his perspective, because he sees all of time like pearls pearls on a necklace, viewing the past and the future to an extent all simultaneously, but with us knowing one that his mind is very meticulous and mostly from his experience of building watches, that much later, like from 1948 to 1958, he had also studied quantum physics at Princeton. And so now on this side, as far as the way that he thinks, when you get into quantum theory, then you start to explore these infinite possibilities. Like if a box is closed, there are infinite possibilities of what could be inside of that box, to which he is related to before as different universes, and it's the combinations of these things that make his perspective very much that of a horologist and a quantum physicist, which are two practices which contradict each other greatly. And there is an area where they do intersect with time and space, but as far as horology, clocks, and time, it is vastly composed of absolutes versus quantum physics, which is not absolute and deals with infinite possibilities. And it's for this reason that you'll see later on, as we do more talks about Dr. Manhattan, that he finds himself conflicted a lot of the time, because who he is and how he thinks can be persuaded, it can be swayed, and is often caught in the middle of the professions of his past. And so now taking all of this and getting into where it bleeds into the DC universe, we'd have to start with the death of the comedian, to where at the time of his death in 1985 in the Watchmen universe, to where in that universe Dr. Manhattan had been Dr. Manhattan for about 26 years. But at the time when we had seen the death of the comedian, which had sparked an investigation that Rorschach went into that dealt heavily with the killing of superheroes in this reality. And ultimately, throughout the course of this investigation, which Rorschach logged from day one within his journal, ultimately ended up getting him killed. And eventually we find out that this was all a plan of Ozymandias, who wanted to save the world pretty much by destroying it, but more so with the grand idea of ending all wars and ending fighting by manufacturing one common enemy and using that method to unite the whole world together. And along with this plan, where part of it was eliminating the world of its superheroes, which included him needing to get rid of Dr. Manhattan, but without being able to literally do so, because you can't kill the guy by conventional means, but because of this, he just manipulated Dr. Manhattan to be a part of his plan. And it's really the conclusion of Watchmen and where Dr. Manhattan goes after leaving, which really sparks my curiosity. And it also gets the theories and the whole realm of speculation fired up too. But in the conclusion of Watchmen, which the film follows after very closely, like if you haven't read the graphic novel, the film's pretty close. But after the conclusion of Watchmen, when Dr. Manhattan had destroyed Rorschach because his investigation had proven to be right, and with Rorschach wanted to tell the truth about Ozymandias and shared it with the world, that just would have undone his whole plan of peace. But after eliminating Rorschach, Dr. Manhattan went back to talk to Ozymandias, and Dr. Manhattan had told him that upon the completion of all this, that Dr. Manhattan was leaving for another galaxy that's less complicated. And when Ozymandias asked if he regained interest in human life, Dr. Manhattan said yes, and that even perhaps he may create some. And when this happened, Ozymandias urged Dr. Manhattan to question, like, did he do the right thing? Did it work in the end? And when he had asked, Dr. Manhattan didn't answer, he had just left. And so it's here when I want to jump back to before Watchmen, which is the prequel for the graphic novel, when we had seen Dr. Manhattan play through a number of these scenarios through the course of time before they actually played out. And in doing so, when he stepped back into the time stream, and in doing so noticing that something was wrong, which I believe mainly was the death of Rorschach, because at the time he couldn't see it clearly. But fast forwarding through that timeline to the aftermath of it all, which once again brings us to the conclusion of Watchmen, we get to see a little bit further beyond that conversation, which for the most part plays out the exact same way. But as for Dr. Manhattan, who mentions here, again, in the past, that he's leaving this galaxy for one that's less complicated, and it plays out the same way. Ozymandias asks his question, Dr. Manhattan just leaves, that's it. Oh, in both instances, he did tell him nothing ever ends. But yet and still, in both scenarios, Dr. Manhattan leaves without giving Ozymandias a full explanation. But moving forward from there, we get a peek into where Dr. Manhattan had left too, and it's here that we see him doing pretty much exactly what he said he was going to do. And with doing so, finding a galaxy that was less complicated, and this galaxy he refers to much like the boxes we had talked about earlier, which are full of mystery because whatever may be in that box, it contains infinite possibilities, and within those infinite possibilities, there may even lay a whole new universe. But within this box and creating this universe, all it takes is just a little energy to accelerate evolution, combine proteins and knit DNA into symphonies of elegance and potentiality. But it's here upon the dawn of this universe's creation, to which he is anxious to see bloom and flourish. But in addition, he also mentions the possibility that he may become something amazing with it, together. And so with that, and just going out on the limb that pretty much the whole internet has been on, with the idea of Dr. Manhattan creating the New 52 universe, which is one of the many things we'll dive much deeper into throughout the course of this playlist. And to my knowledge, that hasn't been confirmed just yet, even though there's a lot of things pointing at that to be true. But in this case, for argument's sake, I'll just say that he did. We'll just say that he did for like the next 30 seconds of this video. But given the instance that he did, and this universe that he created is in fact the New 52, which has changed much throughout your events through the Convergence and through Flashpoint all the way to DC Rebirth as we know it today. But let's just say with the New 52 that it was created by Dr. Manhattan, and the element within that universe that is meant to become something greater with Dr. Manhattan, perhaps that element is just simply hope. Because up to this point in time, there are just 2 instances I can think of, and there's probably more. I'm sure you guys will let me know down in the comments. But up to this point in time, there are like 2 instances that I can think of where Dr. Manhattan's vision has been limited, which is proved not only as a limitation to his power, but is also proven as a place to where he can improve. But the first of the 2 would be his initial vision of killing Rorschach, which he couldn't see clearly. But instead, prior to that event actually playing out, his perspective of it, even though he could see all across time, all at the same time, this particular instance, he described to be as a static image, having much interference and not clear. In the next instance, having to do with his time in the DC universe, deals with his future encounter with Superman, to where after that point, he sees nothing. Not a year later, not a century later, not a millennium later, which even leaves him to wonder, like, did Superman destroy him? Did Superman destroy the universe? Did Superman destroy Dr. Manhattan, causing the destruction of the universe? At this point, who knows? But for this one, I'm just gonna leave the idea and the thoughts right there. Because aside from the showdown that's been like 2 years in the making, there is so much to talk about that has been revolving around all of this. And with there being 4 issues left, and pretty much 3 because issue 9 comes out on my birthday, March 6th. But with us drawing closer to this matchup and this conclusion, there are a lot of things I want to chime in and drop my 2 cents on. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, because I'm curious to know your thoughts about the idea of hope blinding the vision of Dr. Manhattan. And also your thoughts on him creating the New 52 universe. And much of what I looked up on that, like if you just Google it, it all just points back to the Rebirth one-shot, which very much seems like it's supporting that narrative. But for me, I guess I just need to see it plain as day, because back then, the only thing I felt was solid, well, between that and the button, the only thing I felt was solid was just Dr. Manhattan being in the DC universe. But like I said, we'll revisit this because there is so much more we need to talk about and so many lingering factors that need to be addressed. But let me know your thoughts down below, and we'll do it again in the next one. All right, later.